Hello, my name is Phil Sydock, and I'm here today to present Canadian French with Phil S. And we're doing Lesson 1, which is the introduction. For this specific lesson, I want to talk about 6 very different topics that could be of interest to you as someone that I assume is interested in learning more about Canadian French. And I would say regardless of your background, you're probably going to learn something new because I'm not just talking about traditional grammar in this video, but I'm actually delving into linguistics. So I have a background in linguistics, which I'll talk a bit more about later in the video. And I really want to talk about things that I find interesting, and then you might as well. So 6 topics are here, and we're just going to get started. Yes, I do use a flip chart. It is old school, but it's a lot easier on my end. So the first topic is the dark and clear L sounds. And you may think that English only has one L sound, but you're actually mistaken. While it is true that it doesn't actually make a difference in meaning when you use the different L's, it appears in different contexts, and it affects how you speak in Canadian French if you don't at least subconsciously know what that difference is. So here I have English and French, and I have 4 kind of similar words to explain the difference between the dark L and the clear L. So in this case, black means dark L, and then I think that's yellow, means a clear L. So in English we have sale, Sally, and then in French we have sale and Sally. Now let's assume that the vowels are all the same in this context. We're going to be focusing on L, which is a consonant. In English, the context in which an L appears affects which L that you use. So, for example, in the word sal, L is the final sound in the word. So, in this context, you use it as a dark L. And what do I mean by that exactly? Well, if you join me in holding the L while you pronounce the word sal, you'll notice that the contact point is actually at the back of the tongue or back of the mouth. It's also called a velar L, and we'll get into that another time. But when you hold the L for Sally, and I know this is a bit tenuous, but please indulge with me in saying Sally. And although it might seem at first glance that they're the same, it shows up quite quickly when you have an Anglophone trying to pronounce L's in French and apply the same rule. So most likely an Anglophone would have no problem saying Sally, because as you have the rule here where you have a consonant, vowel, L, and then a vowel, you apply the clear L. So that's at the tip of the tongue, or the alveolar L. But you could tell right away that you're dealing with an Anglophone or a non-native French speaker if they pronounce the word sale as sal. So I use this square on purpose because although it is correct to say sal in English with the dark L, in French you want to use the clear L. So at the tip of the tongue. So you would say la salle rather than la salle. And it may still be confusing. However, we're going to get into more exercises on how to use that L, so only the clear L in French, because it's a clear indication that someone that uses the dark L at all in French is a non-native French speaker. Number 2 deals with the circumflex accent, or what I like to call the party hat. or accent circonflexe in French. You may notice a pattern here. So clearly we have the French words on the left and the English words on the right. Now, what you may not know about the English language is that 40 to 50% of its vocabulary comes from Latin and it came through French. So when William the Conqueror conquered England in 1066, this person, William of Normandy, or Guillaume le Conquérant, actually made it so that French became the language of the magistrate or the high courts in English. And because French clearly is a Latin language, a lot of English's modern vocabulary is actually Latin originally. So, coming back to the circumflex accents, if you take a word like chateau, which you have probably heard in one context or another, in English you would say a castle. And you might notice that there's an S here. So, same principle for coat, which in English, and there's a few meanings for coat, but in English, there's coast, S once again. And then finally, for prêtre, we have priest in English, once again with the S. So interestingly enough, at one point in history, the circumflex accent in French represented the sound S. There are a few exceptions to that rule, but for the purposes of learning Canadian French, let's just say that at one point, the circumflex accent represented an S sound. And this will be useful in acquiring a number of words in French. For example, if you happen to speak Spanish, you may know that the word to be, estar, is very similar to the French word être. And then être has a circumflex accent on it. Another example of that, like Spanish and French, would be the word for party. So in Spanish, everyone's heard of a fiesta, and in French, you have a fight. And fight has a party hat on it, because it's a party. Okay, contractions are very straightforward. The classic example in English is do not becomes don't. This is accepted in modern writing. So in French, if you've ever dealt with a French Canadian, you've heard them say je suis as suis, okay? And you could put a CH here, it doesn't really matter, because it's non-standard French and you wouldn't put it in writing. The reason why I mention this is actually because it's very important to be able to speak Canadian French in order to communicate with them. And that's one of the key differences between linguistics and traditional grammar, because linguistics at its very core is a science. It is the scientific study of language, and it's meant to be more descriptive, whereas grammar is more prescriptive in nature. So it tells you what to do. So from the point of view of l'Académie Française, for example, you would definitely write je suis, because they're prescribing how you should write standard French. And there's good reasons for that. But a linguist would be more interested in spoken French. So here, suis ou je suis is non-standard French, but you'd want to be able to describe that. And that's what we're doing at number 3. So, tu sais might become tu, and I'm being a bit liberal with how I write these words because they're kind of made up. And then finally, for the more advanced learner, we have sur la table, ou sur la table, and it may become, in an informal context, sa table. So all of a sudden, the R disappears, and then the L disappears, and then the other L disappears. We'll talk more about that in another video. As a bonus, you may know another word for dollar in French. So yes, there's dollar, évidemment, obviously. But another word that you may have heard, if you're more familiar with Canadian French, is pièce. And it's quite interesting or I would say how that word is written, because you may think that it's written a certain way, but in reality, French speakers have a tendency to want to speak more quickly. And there's, a joke there, but there's some truth in it, because pièce, when it's pronounced as it's written, would be piastre. So piastre became pièce. Interesting. To me, anyway. Number 4 deals with double negatives. So obviously in standard English, you have the single negative, and if you've taken any kind of grammar class in English, they tell you that double negatives are incorrect and they could lead to confusion. While this may be true in standard English, we're dealing with another language, which is Canadian French. So the example I have here is I don't walk. So don't being a contraction once again, and the single negative where the N''T represents the not. So in Canadian French, in modern Canadian French, and what you would call international French, the way to write this would be je ne marche pas. This is commonly accepted, but you may ask yourself why there are double negatives. And it just so happens that I studied linguistics, and I studied under a professor that specialized in this very formulation in French. So French has Latin roots, and originally you would write je ne marche, where the ne is what would indicate the negative. And eventually, we're in a situation now where in informal, kind of spoken French, you may say something like je marche pas. And I think it's normal for a person to ask why that is the case and how that transformed over time. So think of it this way. If you had a sentence saying, I'm not walking, and you wanted to add emphasis, you could say, I'm not walking a single step. So a single step is kind of, a way to add emphasis in English for this specific example. And that's basically what happens in French in the Middle Ages, if I'm not mistaken. So je ne marche became je ne marche pas. As you may or may not know, pas actually means step as well as an indicator of negation. So it used to be je ne marche, and then it became je ne marche pas, and then in a spoken form anyways, it became je marche pas, or if you add the contraction, je marche pas. And you'll hear a lot of that type of sentence in spoken French in Canada. So I think it's important to learn about the background a little bit, because it could help you remember more when you're seeing different things than you're hearing, which is a very big problem in Canadian French specifically. The short version of the story is there's a lot more differences between written and spoken French in Canada as compared to international French, which is a lot closer to standard written French. And that's why I think it's very important to create a course like this, and I'll talk a bit more about that in the questions and answers kind of section of this video. Number 5 is diphthongs and triphthongs. And I swear, although you may have never heard those terms before, you're familiar with the concept because you speak English. Now, if you look at the word fight, you may think that there's only one vowel. And that's kind of true because, in its written form, there's just an I. But if you really slow it down, it's not just a single vowel with no variation within its pronunciation, because it's really more like I. And it's hard for me to even slow it down to that level. But it's not just I. Here's how you say it slowly. I, fight. So you may think that there's only one vowel, but in fact there's a transformation of the vowel within that word. And it is a very distinctive feature of Canadian French because there's a very high number of vowels that are diphthongs in Canadian French, as opposed to International French, which has like none. So I have a few examples here to compare and contrast. So the word for whale is a classic example in linguistics, for whatever reason. So the French word for whale, I would pronounce it as baleine. So ein, baleine. But in International French, you would pronounce it as baleine, n. So there is no diphthong in standard International French. So that's really a clear indicator you're dealing with a French Canadian or someone that speaks Canadian French when you hear that diphthong specifically. It's worth noting that not all speakers of Canadian French actually use diphthongs, however. One clear example is in the higher socioeconomic classes of Quebec City, where there are people that are pronouncing baleine, and there are poor peasants like me from Ontario. I grew up in Ottawa, that definitely has the diphthongs still in my vocabulary, and most likely it's not going to change in my generation, but it might at a certain point. So we'll get back to the word party because it's a great word, and I would pronounce it as fight. So once again, it's the ait. And I'm doing this because that's kind of the shape of your mouth, and we'll get into that another time. But you may guess that in International French, it would be pronounced something like fit, it. So there's no diphthong there. And as a bonus, I wanted to talk about the word for water in French. I'm sure you've heard it. It's pronounced eau, whether that's in Canada or abroad. However, the title of this section is Diphthongs and Triphthongs. So you may be able to guess that tree means three, and at one point in history, there's a reason why water was written with these three vowels, because it was pronounced as a triphthong. And I'm not an expert in medieval French, but it was pronounced something like EAU. So what was before approximately EAU became O. So once again, there's this pattern of French speakers wanting to speak more quickly, and that actually impacting how the language is pronounced. So what was once a joke now comes back with a kernel of truth. So the last thing I wanted to talk about, and this is in very little detail, but I wanted to talk about vowels and vowel archiphonemes. One question you may ask yourself is, how many vowels are there in Canadian French? I provided a few choices here, and yes, it is a trick question. So option A is 6, option B is 10, option C is 20, and option D is 20 plus. I'll give you a second, cue the Jeopardy music. And I could tell you that you can make a case for all 4 of these answers, unfortunately. So A is more from the grammarian's point of view, where there are basically 5 standard vowels in French, like in English, and sometimes Y, so that's A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y. And that, you can make a case for that. Option 2 is B, Option B is 10, and that's more of an argument for archiphonemes. And I know I may not be pronouncing that well, but in French it's Archiphonemes, and that's what I learned in linguistics. So we'll get into more details another time, but in international French, you may make a very good case that there are only 10 vowels in international French. Option C, I wrote 20 specifically because I came across an article talking about Manitoban French specifically that claims to have 20 vowels, with 16 of them being oral and 4 of them being nasal. I'm not going to go into the details of that at this point, but option D is 20 plus. And this is a bit more controversial because I remember listening to my professor talk about this in university, about how many vowels there are in Canadian French. And I put 20 plus because I think I remember her saying that there were 23, but I couldn't find the sources on that, and I actually have to reach out to her personally to confirm that number. So I'm not going to give a specific number at this point, but when we get into more details in another video, we're going to explore that in more deeply. Last thing I wanted to say, talking about vowels, is that Canadian French is the language with the second highest number of vowels. And then in parentheses, I put maybe, because this is, it really depends on who you ask, essentially. But if you put the number at 20 even, you could say that Canadian French has the second highest number of vowels in all the languages in the world, with the first one, if I'm not mistaken, being Cham, which is a variety of Vietnamese, and I know Professor, I think it's Buchanan, would be shaking his fist at me if I got it wrong. But anyways, it's possible that Canadian French is number 2, and that's in very big contrast to international French, which would have that number at around 10. So that's just one of the big reasons why Canadian French is so confusing to many people. It's really the number of vowels. Finally, we have questions and answers, with the first one being, Phil, what are you doing? So I wanted to just explain to you what I'm trying to do with this video and then the subsequent ones. I basically am creating a program to teach Canadian French to anyone who's interested in learning the language. French is my first and favorite language, and I've met too many smart people that don't really have the tools or the resources to learn Canadian French. And I think that's really a shame, because out of the more or less 40 million Canadians, only 7 million have French as a first language, give or take. So you have all these people that potentially want to learn the second official language, and I say second just in terms of number, and they don't really have a comprehensive resource on how to do that. So what I'm really trying to do with this course is provide people with all the tools to go from absolutely no knowledge to completely fluent in Canadian French. And what I think is really fun about this course that I've had as an idea since 2018 is that it's not that difficult for me to make it completely free for the end user, because it costs me nothing, essentially, to upload these videos online. So my overheads is basically like buying this flip chart, all the relevant equipment, and eventually I will be adding more production value to my videos. But at the end of the day, I really want to provide people with the tools to learn the language that I really care about. and I'm comfortable enough speaking in English to present in that language. And obviously French is my first language. I do feel comfortable speaking that language as well. So why? I kind of answered that in the first question. It's just, I think it's really important. And one thing worth mentioning is the government, and that's at the federal and provincial level, maybe to a lesser extent the municipal as well, spends tens of millions of dollars every year in French training. And I don't know who's watching this video exactly, but most people in Ottawa, let's say, knows that the success rates of these French training programs are not that high necessarily. And even the French immersion programs that are offered throughout Canada are not always as successful as they could be. And I think part of the problem is that we have this field of linguistics, which is the scientific study of language, and for whatever reason, language teachers have not integrated any of those principles since its inception in the early 20th century. So what I'm trying to do here is apply those concepts and then really make it accessible to the general public, because I think that whoever wants to put in the effort should have the tools to do it. So that's why I'm doing it. Number 3 is what comes next. And this is the part where I kind of solicit your help a little bit, because I don't really know exactly which one of these 6 things you're the most interested in. So if you could provide like comments, or I guess you could like send me direct messages to let me know what you're most interested in if you're not comfortable with writing it publicly. But I would like to have some engagement on this topic, because I really have a good idea of what I want to present for the introduction portion of the course, but the order in which I present it and then the finer details are negotiable. So I just kind of want to get a bit of feedback on your end. So 4 is I have other comments and questions. What do I do? Very simple, just ask them. Ask your questions, give your feedback. I will actually read it and can take it into consideration when I'm designing this course, because the introduction portion is very flexible. And then after that, we'll get into the core of the program, which is a bit more structured. And I'll talk about that more another time. 5, how will you end this video? Well, if you actually got this far, I just want to say thank you for your time, and I look forward to recording my next video. I don't know when I'll be doing that exactly, because we're now in December and it's holiday season for me too, but essentially I'm looking to really start putting out content more regularly in 2023. So do subscribe, I guess, like this video on whatever platform you're on. And I'm really invested in this idea. I think there's a lot of potential here. And I guess I should talk about myself just a little bit. So my name is Phil Sidock, as I mentioned, and basically I've had a love for languages a long time. I studied linguistics and translation at the University of Ottawa from 2011 to 2014, and I've been working in the government as a translator-editor for a decade, give or take. As a general rule, people write in English, and then that text gets translated into French and then published. So most of my roles have dealt with editing the English first, either translating it myself or having it translated by someone else and then editing the French. So I'm very familiar with the interaction of the 2 languages in a Canadian context, And I feel like I'm in a good position to really create this course in further detail and, you know, go on this journey with you, because learning a language is kind of a journey. I grew up speaking English and French, so that was great. But when I was, I guess, 19, I started learning Spanish, and I basically did most of it over one summer, where I was working like part-time at Winter's Home Sense, like 15, 20 hours a week. And then I just kind of locked myself in the basement, and I was very fascinated with the language. And since then, I've traveled a bit to Spanish-speaking countries, and I love it. I love talking to people, and like it's kind of cool to be able to negotiate in a foreign language in a foreign country. So that's been kind of fun. And then also, I've learned Chinese to, I would say, an intermediate advanced level for the spoken components. But really, I'm focusing right now on learning Russian for a variety of reasons, which I won't get into right now. But I love it. I love learning languages, and rather than focus on me adding to my language profile, I thought it'd be more interesting to help other people learn Canadian French, because I think it's very important to me. And if I could do it full-time rather than work for the government, I would consider it. But obviously the finances kind of have to work for that. And I do have a business plan for this, but I don't really want to talk about it right now. It's just essentially like, if you create true value for people, brands will want to associate themselves with you. And by brands, obviously I mean private companies, but also possibly governments. So the Canadian government, for example, or provincial governments, territorial governments, may want to give me some grant money, which I would definitely be interested in. And, you know, there's things like merchandise that I would be open to selling. But essentially, I do think it's very important for the educational portion of this program to be completely free. I want it to be as accessible as possible for the general public. And I fully intend to keep it that way. That's a very core component of this program. And I really want to keep it free for the end user. And then I could take care of the business end of things through other arrangements. Because ultimately, I kind of think that what I'm providing is very useful, and I don't want to limit my audience because they're feeling priced out for, you know, $5 a month or whatever. There's already enough language learning apps out there that don't work that I'm not a big fan of. But we could talk about what actually works in another video. For now, I'm gonna end it here. I've been talking for almost 35 minutes already. So this is just the introduction. If there was a pie chart of how much I wanted to get into in the introduction module, let's say, I would say we're maybe about 5%, give or take. So this is about 5% of my introduction, and then after that we'll actually start the course. So yes, it's a bit more long format. Yes, there's a lot of information, but ultimately I really want to answer like all your questions, and it may take a bit more time to do that, and I just want to make it in a way that's as interactive as it can be online. So thank you so much for watching this video, and we'll see you next time.